Imagine waking up at 2 in the morning to the sound of tapping on your window. You stumble through the darkness, half asleep, and find a girl standing in the window across the street. Her hands are pressed against the glass. Her mouth is moving. She's repeating the same 2 words over and over again. Help me, help me, help me. But here's the thing that doesn't make sense. It's May. It's warm outside. Yet her breath is fogging the window like it's the middle of winter. And when she steps back into the shadows, you see something that makes your blood run cold. A dark stain spreading across her yellow sweater. The next morning you find out the girl has been dead for 15 years. Welcome to Silent Fear. Today we're exploring one of the most disturbing cases of paranormal activity ever documented. A case that raises terrifying questions about what we see, what we believe, and whether the dead can actually reach out to us when they need help. This is the story of Jenna Murphy and why an entire family became so frightened by what they discovered, they sealed a room in their house and never spoke of it again. Our investigation begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood during the early 1990s. Picture this. A typical American street, lined with 2-story homes, white picket fences, children playing in yards. Nothing remarkable, nothing out of place. Among these ordinary houses lived a young boy who would become our primary witness. We'll call him David, not his real name, but a name that protects his privacy and his peace of mind, which was shattered by what he experienced. David was approximately 10 years old at the time. He was what you might call an observant child, curious, perhaps a bit isolated. The kind of kid who noticed things other people missed. He developed a peculiar habit. Every afternoon after he returned home from school, he would look out his bedroom window toward the house, directly across the street. This wasn't an intentional surveillance. It was simply a curious glance. The kind of distracted observation that a bored child makes when gazing out at the world. For months, there was absolutely nothing to see. Just the ordinary home of an elderly couple named the Murphys. No activity, no signs of life. Nothing that would warrant a second thought. But then, on an ordinary afternoon in spring, everything changed. A girl appeared in the 3rd floor window. David remembers her with perfect clarity, even after all these years. She had long dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She wore a distinctive bright yellow sweater, the kind of color that stands out unmistakably against the interior shadows of a house. She looked to be approximately the same age as David, maybe a year or 2 older, maybe a year or 2 younger. It was difficult to determine exactly. When their eyes made contact across that distance, the girl did something unexpected. She raised her hand and she waved. It was a simple gesture, innocent, friendly, the kind of wave that one person gives another when acknowledging their presence. David, surprised and delighted to discover another person his age living across the street, waved back. Neither of them could have known that this simple exchange, this brief moment of connection between 2 children separated by distance, and unknowingly by time itself, would initiate a friendship that would ultimately uncover a tragedy buried beneath the foundations of that house. What happened over the following weeks established a pattern so precise, so consistent, that it began to feel less like chance and more like a scheduled appointment. Every single day at 3:30 in the afternoon, the exact moment David arrived home from school, the girl would appear in that 3rd floor window. She was always there, without fail, without deviation, like clockwork, and she was always wearing the same yellow sweater. David began to anticipate her appearance the way other children might anticipate their favorite television show. He would rush home from school specifically to be at his window at that precise moment. He would position himself in front of the glass at 3:25 just to be absolutely certain he wouldn't miss her, and she would never disappoint him. The two children developed an elaborate system of nonverbal communication. It was a game, really, a way for two isolated children to connect across the physical barrier that separated them. The girl would hold up drawings, crude sketches, pencil marks on paper, and David would attempt to guess what they depicted. Was it a house? A tree? An animal? He would mouth his guesses, and the girl would nod enthusiastically if he was correct, or shake her head with a smile if he was wrong. In return, David would hold up his school homework assignments. The girl would examine them carefully, her expression serious and focused. Then she would give him a thumbs up, indicating that his work was acceptable, or a thumbs down, suggesting that he needed to try harder. They were teaching each other, encouraging each other, playing the roles of friends despite the impossible distance between them. This continued without interruption for several weeks. David's days became organized around this ritual: school, home, 3:30, with the girl in the yellow sweater, homework, dinner, sleep. Repeat. On warmer days, when the spring weather permitted, David would open his bedroom window and attempt to establish verbal communication. He would call out to her. He would speak words across the distance, hoping that somehow his voice would carry through the open air and penetrate the closed window of her room. But the girl never opened her window. She would simply smile at his efforts. She would point to her ear in a gesture that communicated a clear message. She could not hear him. The glass barrier between them was impenetrable. Sound could not pass through it. David eventually accepted this limitation. He assumed her parents were strict about maintaining closed windows. Perhaps they were concerned about air conditioning costs. Perhaps they had rules about fresh air. Whatever the reason, the closed window became simply another element of their friendship, another limitation that the two of them had learned to navigate during this time. David's curiosity began to grow. Who was this girl? Where did she come from? Why was she always alone in that room? One evening, he asked his mother directly, "Mom, who lives in that house across the street?" His mother responded with a straightforward answer. The Murphys, an older couple, no children. David paused. He described the girl in detail, the dark hair, the yellow sweater, the way she appeared every afternoon at the same time. His mother's response was logical and reassuring. "Maybe they have a granddaughter visiting for the summer. That would explain why you're just now seeing her." David accepted this explanation. It made sense. It solved the mystery in a way that was comfortable and rational. But deep in his mind, a worry had taken root. If the girl was visiting, then eventually she would leave. Visits end. Summer ends. Granddaughters go back to their homes in other cities, other states, other lives. One day, she would simply stop appearing in that window, and David would be alone again. For several weeks, the routine continued uninterrupted. Then, in the first week of May, something changed. David awoke at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't a gentle awakening. It was abrupt. His eyes snapped open. His heart was racing. Something had disturbed his sleep. Something had pulled him out of his dreams. Then he heard it. Tapping. A rhythmic, persistent tapping sound against his bedroom window. Confused and still heavy with sleep, David dragged himself out of bed and approached the window. He pulled back the curtain, expecting to see nothing. A branch, perhaps. Wind against the glass. A neighborhood cat. Instead, he saw the girl. She was standing in her window, the third-floor window across the street, at 2 o'clock in the morning, which made no sense. She had never appeared at any time other than 3:30 in the afternoon, immediately after school. But there she was, and something was profoundly different about her. She was not smiling. Her face, visible in the darkness, appeared distressed, anxious. Her hands were pressed together in front of her chest in a gesture that communicated desperation and pleading. She was pointing frantically downward, pointing at something that David could not see from his window. Her entire body language screamed urgency, desperation, fear. David didn't understand what she was trying to communicate. He didn't know what she wanted. The fear in her expression, the intensity of her gestures, the wrongness of the situation, it all combined into a feeling of dread that overwhelmed his young mind. Without fully understanding why, David felt afraid. He backed away from the window. He didn't close the curtain. He simply retreated from the glass and climbed back into bed, pulling the blankets over his head like a barrier against whatever was happening across the street. The tapping continued for a few more minutes. Then it stopped. The girl did not appear at her window for the next 3 days. David waited. 3:30 came and went. No girl in the yellow sweater. 4 o'clock. 5 o'clock. 6 o'clock. Nothing. The second day was the same. Empty window. No sign of life. By the third day, David had begun to convince himself that something was wrong, that he had somehow upset her, that his fear, his rejection of whatever she was trying to communicate, had caused her to abandon him. He felt guilty. He felt sad. He felt like he had failed his only friend. On the fourth night, the tapping resumed. This time it was more aggressive, more insistent. David woke not just startled, but frightened. This wasn't a gentle tap. This was a demand. He approached the window. The girl was there again, and she was pressing both of her palms flat against the glass. Her entire body was leaning forward. Her mouth was moving rapidly, and even from the distance separating them, David could see that she was speaking urgently. But the window was closed. The glass was sealed. No sound reached across the void between them. David could only watch her lips, could only attempt to read the words she was repeating over and over again. Then something happened that defied explanation. Despite the warm May temperature, approximately 70 degrees Fahrenheit, David's breath began to fog the glass of his own window. That was expected. But the girl's breath was fogging her window too. Thick, visible condensation, dense enough to obscure her features momentarily before evaporating. But it was May. It was warm. How was she creating that kind of condensation? The girl continued moving her lips. The same phrase, over and over, repeated with increasing desperation, and David, reading those lips, began to understand what she was saying. Help me, help me, help me. The girl stepped back from the window, and that's when David saw it. A dark stain on her yellow sweater. A blotch of something that was definitely not paint. Definitely not mud. Something darker. Something that made David's stomach turn with a feeling he couldn't name. A feeling of profound wrongness. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He simply reacted. David ran from his room. He ran down the hallway. He ran to his parents' bedroom and burst through the door, crying, panicking, trying to explain what he had seen. His words came tumbling out incoherently. The girl, the window, help me, the stain, the breathing. None of it made sense, but all of it was true. His father wasted no time. He immediately went to David's room. He looked out the window toward the Murphy house. The light in the third-floor room was off. The window was empty. The girl was gone. His parents attempted to comfort him. They assured him that it had been a nightmare, nothing more than a vivid dream brought on by an overactive imagination and too much television before bedtime. They told him to return to sleep. But David knew what he had experienced. It wasn't a dream. It was real. As real as the fear still coursing through his body. As real as the image of that dark stain permanently burned into his memory. The next afternoon, desperation and confusion drove David to take an action that would change everything. He climbed the wooden fence that separated his family's property from the Murphy house. His heart was racing. He didn't know what he was going to say. He didn't know what answer he was expecting. He simply needed to know. In the backyard of the Murphy house, he found Mrs. Murphy working in her garden. She was tending to flowers, her hands in the soil, her expression peaceful and serene. She looked up as David approached, and a warm smile crossed her face. Mrs. Murphy seemed genuinely delighted to see him, even though they had never formally met, even though David had never spoken to her before. David smiled nervously and waved. Then he asked the question that had been consuming him. "Mrs. Murphy, I was wondering, is there a girl living in your house? In the third-floor bedroom?" Mrs. Murphy's facial expression changed instantly. The warmth drained from her eyes. The smile disappeared from her face. She slowly set down her watering can. She wiped her hands on her pants. And she walked a little closer to the fence, her entire demeanor shifting from friendly to something more serious. "How long have you been seeing her?" Mrs. Murphy asked. Her voice was steady, but David could detect an undertone of concern. "A few weeks," David answered honestly. "We play games through the window. We wave at each other every day at 3:30. But then, something happened. I saw her at night and she looked scared. And there was something on her sweater and..." Mrs. Murphy cut him off. "What did she look like?" she asked. David described her in detail. The dark hair, the ponytail, the bright yellow sweater. The way she never opened her window. The way she pointed to her ear like she couldn't hear him. When he finished speaking, Mrs. Murphy was silent for a long moment. Her expression had become difficult to read. There was sadness there. Recognition. Something else that David couldn't identify. Finally, she spoke. "Go back inside," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Go back inside right now." David didn't argue. He couldn't explain why, but he sensed that Mrs. Murphy had just revealed something significant, something important, something that would have serious consequences. He climbed back over the fence and returned to his house. That evening, his suspicions were confirmed. His parents behaved very differently. They were quieter than usual. His mother kept glancing at him with an expression somewhere between concern and regret. His father seemed uncomfortable, like he was struggling with a difficult decision. That night, without explanation, they moved David's bed to the opposite wall, the wall that faced away from the window, away from the Murphy house. The next morning, his parents installed heavy light-blocking curtains over his bedroom window, the kind of curtains used in hospitals. the kind of curtains designed to eliminate all light and visibility from both directions. When David asked why they were doing this, his parents offered only vague explanations. "It will help you sleep better," they said. "You need more rest." But David knew the truth. They were cutting him off from the window. They were intentionally preventing him from seeing across the street. The girl never appeared in the window again. The next day, David's mother informed him that he was too old for imaginary friends. She forbade him from going near the window. She refused to provide any explanation for her decision. She simply stated it as fact and moved on. David protested. He insisted that the girl was real, that he had seen her for months, that she wasn't imaginary. His mother simply repeated her statement. "You're too old for imaginary friends, and I don't want you looking out that window anymore." No further discussion was permitted. David's life became a study in isolation. The window that had once been his connection to the outside world was now forbidden territory. His parents had effectively cut him off from his only friend, and they refused to tell him why. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The window remained covered, the curtains remained drawn, the questions remained unanswered. Approximately 1 year after the incident with Mrs. Murphy, David's family relocated to a different neighborhood. They left without explanation. They left without saying goodbye to the neighbors. They simply packed their belongings and moved away. David never discovered the truth about the girl, not then. It wasn't until David reached high school, nearly a decade later, that his mother finally decided to explain what had happened. Even then, she revealed only what Mrs. Murphy had told her. She didn't elaborate beyond the facts. She didn't speculate. She simply stated what she had learned. Approximately 15 years before David had moved to that neighborhood, a tragic accident had occurred directly in front of the Murphy house. A young girl named Jenna, only 11 years old, had been struck by a vehicle immediately after school dismissal. The accident had happened at the exact time when children were typically leaving school, the exact time when Jenna should have been walking home. She had been wearing a bright yellow sweater on that day. Jenna had died. When Jenna's family eventually moved away from the house, they never returned. The trauma was simply too great. The memories were too overwhelming. They needed to escape the place where their daughter had died. Years later, the Murphys purchased the house. But they had quickly discovered that they were not alone in it. Mrs. Murphy had initially attempted to use the third-floor room as a guest bedroom, as an office, as a storage space. But each time she entered that room, something occurred that made her deeply uncomfortable. According to what Mrs. Murphy had told David's mother, paranormal activity occurred in that space with such frequency and intensity that the Murphys made a decision. They would seal the room completely. They nailed the door shut. They blocked the windows. They essentially quarantined that space from the rest of the house. David's mother never learned the specific details of what the Murphys had experienced. She didn't press for information. She didn't ask for elaborate descriptions. She simply accepted that something inexplicable was happening in that house, something that had frightened a rational elderly couple so profoundly that they had taken the extraordinary step of sealing an entire room. David's mother described Mrs. Murphy as very spiritual. This was her way of indicating that the elderly woman possessed beliefs and knowledge about paranormal phenomena that extended beyond conventional understanding. But Mrs. Murphy never shared those details with David's family. The room remained sealed, and the mystery remained unsolved. David is now 34 years old. He carries the memory of the girl in the yellow sweater with him every day. Over the decades, he has developed what can only be described as a profound phobia of windows, a clinical fear that goes beyond simple anxiety. It's a deep, instinctive aversion to looking through glass barriers. He refuses to live in a house with windows that face neighboring buildings. This decision is not aesthetic. It is not based on privacy concerns or architectural preference. It's based on fear. His current residence was specifically chosen because it contains no windows facing other houses. He has deliberately structured his living environment to eliminate the possibility of seeing or being seen by anything or anyone on the other side of glass. He also experiences discomfort around reflective surfaces, mirrors, still water, any reflective material that might provide a glimpse of something other than the immediate surroundings. Over the years, David has experienced periodic dreams in which the girl appears once more. In these dreams, she is not hostile. She is not frightening in the traditional sense, but she no longer smiles at him. In these dreams, the girl simply watches him. She observes him from across some distance. She looks at him with an expression of profound sadness, of loss, of longing. The dreams are not nightmares in the conventional sense, but they carry an emotional weight that remains difficult for David to articulate even to himself. He wakes from these dreams feeling a sadness that lingers throughout the day. So what actually happened in that house? Was David experiencing genuine paranormal contact with a traumatized spirit seeking help? Was Jenna Murphy desperate to communicate something crucial, reaching out across the barrier between life and death to connect with a living person? Or did David experience a psychological phenomenon? A manifestation of his subconscious mind creating an elaborate fantasy based on details his conscious mind could not have possibly known? Consider the psychological profile of our witness. David was an isolated child, observant, curious, lonely. Precisely the type of individual who might be particularly susceptible to suggestion and pattern recognition. The type of child whose mind might fill in gaps with imagination when confronted with incomplete information. It's possible that David's subconscious mind constructed the girl in the yellow sweater as a companion, a friend, someone to ease his isolation. But then, how do we explain the reactions of the adults? How do we explain the behavior of the Murphys? How do we explain the decision of David's parents to move his bed, install curtains, and ultimately relocate the entire family? These were not the reactions of parents who believed their child was experiencing a simple imaginary friendship. These were the reactions of people who had learned something concrete, something specific, something true enough to terrify them into action. The Murphys' decision to seal an entire room in their house suggests that something genuine enough, unexplainable enough, had occurred to motivate such an extraordinary decision. What exactly happened in that third-floor room? What did the Murphys experience? What did Mrs. Murphy witness or discover that convinced her it was necessary to permanently seal the space? We may never know. The only certainty is this: a girl named Jenna Murphy died in front of that house wearing a yellow sweater. The Murphys experienced something in their home serious enough to seal it off completely, and a young boy witnessed something across a window that changed his life forever. Whether that something was paranormal or psychological, the impact was real. The trauma was real, and the questions remain unanswered. If you have experienced something similar, something that defies rational explanation, we encourage you to share your story with us. Leave a comment below. Describe what you witnessed. Tell us what you experienced. And please, like this video. Subscribe to Silent Fear for daily horror stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an investigation. Because somewhere out there are others who have seen what should not exist, felt what cannot be explained, encountered something that exists in the spaces between the rational and the unexplainable. They deserve to be heard. Silent Fear. We're listening. Thank you for watching.